Welcome back to the Abundant Culture Podcast, where business owners like you come to learn how to grow the valuation of their companies so they can sell in the future. On this show, you'll learn how to sell for top dollar and invest in profitable businesses around the country. Now, here are your hosts, Jazz and Joe.
Welcome back to Abundant Culture Podcast. We are super excited to have you today because we are talking about a topic that is absolutely my favorite thing ever, which is reading. I love to read. I probably don't read as much as I would like to, and I definitely haven't even had the chance to dive into the Harry Potter books again yet, but reading is definitely like a top activity for me, and I feel like reading is just something that everybody needs to do. And I mean like actually like physically reading the books instead of just listening to them, because it's just a different skill set, like of comprehension and stuff. Because like if you're listening to like a podcast or a book, like an Audible, then you comprehend things differently than you would reading it. And I feel like I'm a more visual person than audible. So especially when it comes to like money and numbers, I'm not a numbers person. So if I'm reading a book and they're trying to spell out a calculation, then nope, you lost me. It went over my head. I'm not even listening anymore. But I think like physically reading a book is just super valuable. So in this episode, we want to talk to you about our top book recommendations that have helped us significantly in business.
Oh, so you want me to start off?
Sure.
Okay, so I'll preface this by saying that I have not read a lot of books because I am definitely not a avid reader. I read because it is definitely necessary. However, I'm very slow at reading. It takes me forever to get through a book. And even though I like learning, it's really hard for me to just sit down and read a book for some reason, which is weird because I have a fairly decent attention span compared to some people. But when it comes to just sitting down reading a book, that's complicated. Maybe because I'm so slow at it. But without further ado, I would say I'm trying to give you my top three because I've read several books, not many, but I've read several books, and I think they're all good in some ways, but I think I want to give you the ones that were probably the most pivotal in my professional journey personally. So the first book that I think is at the top of the list, for me anyway, is Rich Dad Poor Dad. If I did not read Rich Dad Poor Dad, I would not be a small business owner. I would struggle financially pretty much for the rest of my life.
And would not be talking to you right now on this podcast.
And would not have a podcast because I wouldn't have anything great to talk about. And the only thing that I like talking about is business and money for the most part. And then comic books and physics. But outside of that, you know, business and money are by far two of my favorite things to speak about. And Rich Dad Poor Dad was the book that started all of that. And I think even though people say, oh, that book's like super old, it definitely is. But it's one of those books that I believe are timeless because of the principles in that book. They're never going to go out of style. I think when a book has strong principles, you can read it 100 years into the future and some of it still applies. Now, does that mean you have to agree with every single thing that Robert Kiyosaki says? Absolutely not. But that book, especially if you grew up poor or middle class, definitely helps to reframe your mindset around money. And if you are poor or middle class right now, then the first thing that you're going to have to do is reframe your mindset around money. A lot of people try to change their activities without changing their mindset. And a change of activity without a change of mindset, one, it doesn't last very long. You're not going to keep doing those activities that you need to do. And two, you won't do them at the level that you need to because your mindset is, you know, the old way. So I think that's probably one of the best books that I've read to change my mindset around money, cash flow, assets, what's a liability versus an asset. You know, one of the biggest things that book taught me was that an asset isn't necessarily a thing, it's more so like a verb. So if I have a house, my personal residence is not an asset. However, if I rent that house out, it's an asset. If I pull cash out of it and then go use it to buy high cash flowing assets, it is an asset. So it depends on what I do with the thing, not what the thing actually is. Big lesson, big takeaway from that book. The next book that was very impactful for me is Money Master the Game by Tony Robbins. That is a ridiculously, so like
it's like 700 pages.
Yeah, if you look at that book, you'll basically be like, he's lying. He said he wasn't a reader, and there's no person on the face of the planet who says they're not a reader that reads a 700 page book. But it's a really well written book, and it just kept me coming back. And there were days where, like I said, not a reader, but I read 25 to 30 pages of it, which is hard to get me to read 25 to 30 pages of anything in a day. But it's a really good book because it teaches you the mechanics behind your money. So what is a mutual fund? How is that different from an ETF? What are the expenses that are associated with mutual funds, ETFs, 401ks? What's the difference between a 401k? What's the difference between a 401k and an IRA? All these different types of things. Roth versus traditional. All those traditional things about money that you probably hear people talk about. But let's face it, if you haven't really studied it or read up on it, a lot of people don't know what those things mean. And I was in the same situation. Like, I've heard of all those terms for it, but I didn't really know what they mean and what were the real life implications of them. And that book taught everything. Now, the interesting thing is I feel like Money Master the Game doesn't give the best solution on how to build wealth, but it shines a lot of light on how it's traditionally done and things you can do to improve on the traditional route, because the traditional route, as you'll see in the book if you decide to read it, isn't all that great. So third and finally, the other book that I think was very pivotal in my development, that honestly I've read it pretty recently, but it was Budgeting Sucks by Garrett Gunderson. Garrett Gunderson is awesome. He has a company called Wealth Factory where he helps people build wealth. So I do believe that he specifically works with people who have some type of wealth already, but he helps them become wealthier and protect what they already have. And Budgeting Sucks, as the name probably implies to you, kills a lot of closely held myths about finances and money. It talks about, obviously, budgeting sucking, because it does suck. There is a better way to manage your cash flow so that you don't have to do the traditional budgeting of cutting back things you enjoy in order to hopefully enjoy those things in the future. What I love about Garrett Gunderson is he's the type of guy who wants to figure out how to have his cake and eat it too. And I believe that life is too short not to do that. So he talks about, instead of the traditional budgeting, how can you still enjoy the lifestyle that you want to live while increasing your cash flow, not only now, but for the future as well. So he talks about not only alternatives to budgeting, but he also talks about how to protect your cash flow using different types of insurances, and how to actually not pay so much in insurance, which actually helps your cash flow. So many different nuggets. And a lot of these books might sound like you kind of need to be a financial nerd in order to read them, but in all actuality, all the books that I just talked about, they actually help you become a financial nerd if you're not already one, which is exactly how I became one, because I was not born that way, obviously. So yeah, those three books are probably my top three is in regards to book recommendations.
So my turn now. I don't know if I don't really have like an order for books, but these are just kind of like the top 4 books that I can think about in the moment. I'm sure I'm missing some books. I have books like everywhere around the house, so I just looked at the bookshelf right now and figured out what I can say in this episode. But yeah, so I'm sure there are many other books, but I've also done book reviews too on our YouTube channel. So if you're interested in, hearing more about some of the books that I've read before, then that's on the Jazz and Joe YouTube channel. So the first book this is like definitely one of my top books, and I absolutely love this man. I fell in love with him when Joe read Money Master the Game, and I'm talking about Ray Dalio. The book is Principles. Now this is another humongous book. This is like probably like a Harry Potter book, like 500-600 pages. But it was so good because The first half of the book was more so about like his life and his experiences, how he started up the company, and then it also went into why he made some of the company decisions he made. And if you know Ray Dalio, you know that he invests in commodities. So like in the book he talked about, you know, knowing so much about this stock that if the weather changed, then he knew whatever would happen, like it would go up or down or whatever the case may be. So I just thought that was super fascinating. And then the second half of the book was all about like his company culture. And at the time we weren't operating a company yet, but this was around the time I was just trying to prepare myself for when we were going to be operating our coffee shop, because we had bought into the franchise at that point, but we didn't start operating it yet. And we also didn't buy the second location either yet. So I'm just trying to prepare, you know, be the best leader that I can be. And in the Principles book, man, he just talked about so much. Like the company culture that they have at Bridgewater is just, it really does seem like absolutely amazing. It seems like everything is just so clear, like the communication is clear, the expectations are clear. So it talks about all of that in the book. So if you want to learn more about company cultures, or if you want to learn more about Ray Dalio, his company, the way he invests, then, and I think it also talked about that all-weather portfolio plan too. That was all in Principles. So I would highly recommend that anyone that operates a business, which is you, to read that book, because it's necessary. The second book that I recommend is 48 Laws of Power. This is by Robert Greene, and I might even go as far as to say this is my number one favorite book right now. And the reason I say that is because a lot of times people, including myself, we all struggle with like our confidence, our ego at times. We have like this fear that we're not doing things right, that we're being judged, whatever the case may be. In that book, he talks a lot about like ancient history and the way they did things, and a lot of times, you know, things were like really brutal and petty. However, there was still a lesson to be learned, whether you should do something or you shouldn't do something. But the book also taught me just how to be, I guess, more firm, more strict in what, you know, I'm doing in business. Really, it's just a total confidence booster in business, I would say. And at the end of the day, I feel like if you're in business, then you are absolutely trying to obtain power. And I don't think that there's anything wrong with that. Like Joe and I talk about that all the time. But it's totally about the way that you go about trying to obtain that power. Like, are you going to do it in, you know, a moral way, a right, just way, or are you going to try to cut around the edges, you know, cut people off, be petty, or whatever the case may be? Are you going to try to do it the right way or the wrong way? And I feel like that book definitely highlights the right way to go about obtaining power. And what I really liked about that book is that Robert Greene partnered with 50 Cent, and they wrote the 50th Law. So I read that immediately after, and that was super good too. So it's kind of just like an add-on to the 48 Laws of Power. I don't know where Law 49 is. Maybe it's another separate book about that or something. I don't know. But yeah, so 48 Laws of Power by Robert Greene. Definitely a great read. Confidence booster. Everybody needs it. The third book I want to recommend is by Ryan Holiday, and Robert Greene is actually his mentor, so they write almost the same way, very similar. And the book is called Stillness is the Key. And the reason I really like this book is because I think at the time of reading this, it was just so much going on. I read it, did I read it last year, like in 2020?
Yeah, I think so.
So everything is just crazy. Like, it's just, it's just like chaotic. And at the time, I wanted to find the stillness in myself, you know, like learn how to be more present for myself personally too. But there also comes a time where you need it in business. And in the Stillness is the Key book, he talked about like all these different famous people that I cannot remember any of their names right now. I do have copious notes though, if anybody wants the notes. But he talks about all these different people, and like some of the men, I remember he said they wake up, a part of their morning routine would be going for like a walk, and then they would go for a walk again at like lunchtime, And these are like generals and stuff. So it's like, you know, like, what are you doing during, like, don't you need to be, you know, reading, strategizing, something like that? But it was something about the walk that really helped them with their strategy, with their different plays, with their businesses, you know, with their own personal life, business life, whatever the case may be. And I'm probably not doing the book justice, but it was super helpful for me, especially now, you know, with social media and everything. It's just a lot going on all the time. So if you can find the time to pretty much just meditate, then I feel like you become a better person, which will lead to you becoming a better business owner or investor or, you know, father, son, you know, it'll make you become a better you. And then the last one I wanted to mention, I recently just read this, and we were actually a part of the Mastermind too, and we took the course and everything, is called The Wealthy Franchisee by Scott Greenberg. We also had him on the podcast. Can't remember the episode number, but it was maybe a couple of months before this one goes live. And basically in that book, it was just so practical. And, you know, I love reading mindset books. I read a lot of them, but sometimes I really, really need like a practical book because I'm trying to find a solution to a problem that I currently have. And this book was helpful in that very way. And I will say that, yes, it is about franchising. However, when you have the right system, you can franchise that system, or you can just use that system for your non-franchised business. So even if you're not a franchisee, or even if you do not plan on being a franchisor in the future, I think it's still a really good book to read if you are a business operator, or if you're searching for a business operator to invest in, because the book has like these super practical nuggets, you know, about leadership, about what else did we learn? We learned so much in that book about hiring, company culture. What else was in it?
Basically using what's called a decision matrix in order to make decisions, because the problem that comes with running a business, especially for us, you know, we're going to have CEOs that are employed by us who are in control of running the company. And the thing about it is you need to train somebody on how to make decisions, which go look for a course in college or in high school or any school. I don't care which school it is, and try to find a course on how to teach somebody how to make decisions. It's one of those things that I think is still mostly intuitively done nowadays, but it doesn't have to be. You can systematize the way that you make decisions and then hand that off to somebody so they can actually start to make decisions the same way that you do. So there was the decision matrix that I think was kind of one of the biggest things for me.
I think we really like the 30-second leadership in there too.
Yeah.
We definitely have to revisit it, but it's something that we plan on using to help train our managers and our CEOs so that they can then train other people as well. So yeah, that book is so good, and like the course was really good too. So I read the book, and actually I read it in like 2 days, and that's pretty uncommon for me nowadays since I'm like so busy with everything that I'm doing right now. But I read it really fast because it was so good. And then Joe didn't read it, but
obviously,
like 90% or 99%, whatever, of the material that was in the book is also in his course in the mastermind that he holds as well. So I highly recommend you check that out. You probably should even go listen to that episode right now. It's called Becoming the Wealthy Franchisee with Scott Greenberg. Phenomenal episode. Amazing person. So that's all the books that we wanted to recommend. So I guess we call this episode the top 8 business books to recommend or to read or
top
something. Top 7. Yeah, see, math goes right over my head, man. All right, well, thank you for listening, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you for listening to the Abundant Culture Podcast with Jazz and Joe. If you enjoyed this episode, make sure you subscribe, then leave an honest rating and review. And remember, we're ready to buy your business. So if you're ready to sell or passively invest in other small businesses, go to abundantculture.co for more information. We publish episodes every Friday, so we'll see you next week.